So this is the second video in our series on individual characteristics. In the last video, I talked about the importance of self-awareness. So let's look specifically at personality and how an understanding of your own personality can enhance self-awareness, and an understanding of others, of personality in general, can enhance your ability to work effectively with people. Personality we would define as a combination of stable traits that really differentiates people from each other. And stable means that personality, it's not that personality never changes, but it's not easy to change, and it doesn't change very readily or very quickly. So people's personalities can evolve or change over time, but it's very difficult to say, I want to have a different personality, I'm just going to start doing it. Personality shows up in our behaviors, and yes, we can change our behaviors, but our real personality is our kind of innate preferences and our innate tendencies. So you can act in a way that is not consistent with your personality, and if you continue to do so over a long period of time, that may eventually work back to change your personality, but it takes a long sustained effort to change personality. So that's why I say it's pretty stable. Now, where does a person's personality come from? I mean, research on that would say it's partly genetics. There's probably something hardwired into us, why some of us have certain personalities than others. I mean, ever since I've had kids, I see like early signs of personality at an incredibly early age and that differentiate my kids from each other. But there's certainly environmental factors that affect things as well. And so our early experiences shape our personality as well. So there's a lot of different personality dimensions out there and different studies of personality. Now, the one we're going to pay attention to most in this class is called the Big Five. The Big Five personality types. And the reason we focus on that is because even though some other kinds can also be popular in workplaces, the Big Five are the ones that have received the most empirical support, and people have researched the Big Five in all sorts of cultures and all over the world in different kinds of surveys and tools, and they consistently show up as the five main types of personality differences. And the way they arrived at the Big Five, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but basically the way they arrived at the Big Five, which are, in other words, 5 different personality traits, is by looking at hundreds and hundreds of different traits of people. Just whatever you could think of. And if you measure all of it and you start to do fancy statistical techniques, you get to see that you could actually show whether some traits are similar to each other. They coalesce around a certain kind of theme, and others are different. And if you do that, you do this kind of analysis, you find that there's 5 broad clusters of personality types, and those are the Big Five, right? So each dimension of the Big Five is different from the others. It does not correlate with the others. It doesn't align with the other ones. It's unique. And each one has subtypes associated with it that are all similar and all encapsulated with the one type. So these are the Big Five. And like I said, they're all different from each other. You may say in your head, well, I know a lot of extroverts who are agreeable. Okay, but I mean, they're not statistically related. They're distinct. If they were similar, they would have been collapsed into one trait. So the fact that these are 5 means they all operate kind of independently. And they're a continuum. So extroversion ranges from extroversion at one end, highly extroverted, very outgoing, to more introverted, withdrawn on the other end. And I'm not going to really repeat all of the descriptions of these. I mean, they're in your book. You can see them here. I just want you to say this is the Big Five, and this is the typology that we'll be most concerned with. And there's an assignment for you to do an assessment in your book, which is a short assessment that gets at the Big Five. It measures you on these. There are many, many assessments out there that assess on the Big Five. There's actually another one that I provided a link to on Blackboard through the discussion board. So if you want to see a more involved assessment to see what the results show, you can check that discussion board out and see that. Now, there's a few things to think about with respect to personality. And first of all, I want to say you can kind of ask yourself these questions to help you kind of engage with it. And I want to talk about what these questions are, and I want to talk about some answers to these questions and some implications. Okay? So the first question that people often ask, either of themselves or out loud, is, what are some types of personality better than others? Is it better to be highly extroverted versus introverted? Is it better to be more agreeable versus not? And it's a tough question to answer because in principle, no, there's no such thing as a better type in general. But culturally, there is. So for example, in the US, we would probably prioritize certain types of personalities over others. So in business, extroverts tend to get ahead more than introverts. So introverts have to learn to act more extroverted if they want to be successful, just generally. If you're not conscientious, that can make things a little bit more challenging for you in this culture in terms of what's expected of responsibility, dependability, getting your work done, following through. That's what employers want to see. So if you're not like that by nature, you may have to work harder to do that. What are the implications of personality? We're going to look at a couple. In a minute, I'll show you a slide that talks about a few of those. I mean, it's pretty broad, so we can only get into that so much. But there is a lot of research that looks at how different personality types tend to do, performance-wise, commitment-wise, and they do find some patterns which reinforce largely some of the expectations about preferred personality types. What challenges or there opportunities are there with personality with respect to your team? As you learn about your own personality in this class, your teammates are also learning about their personalities, and that presents you all with some challenges to say, okay, given our personalities, what does it mean for us to work effectively together? We know, let's say that, are we really similar to each other? And are we therefore going to face some challenges and some benefits associated with that? Are really different from each other? And if we're different from each other, what challenges does that present? So measuring personality is a great way to kind of get at the inner workings of a team to figure out what do we got here and what do we need to make this particular group effective. So we'll talk about more. We'll talk about that some more at another time. I do want to make the point here that personality is not ability. Okay, this is a very important point. We'll talk about ability in the next video. Personality is not the same thing as ability, and it does not really. It has nothing to do with ability. So in other words, if you're extroverted, you're an outgoing person by nature. That doesn't mean that you're unable to be quiet. You like to talk, and you're therefore unable to stop. Or if you're introverted, it doesn't mean that you're unable to be sociable. Right? Ability is a different story. This is just your tendency, your natural preference, right? So that's why I say don't worry about what your personality type is. If you scored a certain way, you're like, oh no, I have the wrong personality. Don't worry about that. I mean, we are who we are, and if you want to, we can all learn behaviors. Learning how to do well in a social situation might come a little easier to somebody who's more extroverted. A person who's introverted might have to work more at it, but introverts can be very sociable, nice, talkative people. I'm kind of an introvert. Here I am, giving lectures and running classes and talking to a lot of people. Maybe it would come more naturally to me if I was extroverted. I don't know, but I'm still able to do my job. So ability and personality are not the same thing. So to say that you're not conscientious in terms of your personality doesn't mean that you can't be responsible. It just means your tendency is maybe to not be, so you have to try a little harder. But like I said, we can all learn any behavior, and we can all, and maybe even over time, if we continue to exhibit a behavior, it changes our personality. Like I think I'm not a very schedule-oriented person by nature in terms of that aspect of conscientiousness, but having had to do it more and more and more, I think that aspect of my personality has kind of gradually evolved. So be careful about that, mixing personality and ability. So personality does matter, to get at that second question. For example, research shows that conscientiousness does link to performance and commitment across the board. That's one of the reasons why organizations like to have people who are conscientious. Agreeableness, not surprisingly, agreeableness is linked to customer service skills. And by the way, agreeableness doesn't mean that you agree. Whether or not you agree with an idea has nothing to do with your personality. It just has to do with the idea. Agreeableness has to do with your likability and your friendliness and do you tend to be a warm, approachable, caring person, or do you tend to be more distant, aloof, cold? But whether or not you agree with any given idea has nothing to do with personality. So don't be confusing that with the name of this trait. Extroversion. Extroverts tend to do well in sales. They tend to be happier at work, the job satisfaction. There's also research to show that extroverts are more likely to emerge as leaders. In other words, people tend to see extroverts as more leader-like. That doesn't mean they're more effective. That just means they tend to be seen as leaders, which is one of the reasons why extroverts tend to have an easier time in organizations, because they get the chance to be the leader, be the manager, more so than the introvert who people are like, I don't know if this person could do it. But like I said, ability is a different story. So there are plenty of extroverts who are not good leaders, just like there are plenty of introverts who are not good leaders, and there are plenty of introverts who are very good leaders if given the chance. So it's not correlated with leadership effectiveness, just with leadership emergence. Neuroticism, which is emotional stability. People who are more neurotic, more emotionally unstable, often have higher stress, more anxiety. That can lead to less job satisfaction, and some other effects talked about more in your book. And openness to experience, that creativity, that thinking broadly. Obviously, people like that are easier to train into new positions, to move around. And creativity, not surprisingly, is linked to that as well. So these are just some examples of research that's looked at how personality matters. Again, it's not that people who are more open have the greater ability to be creative, because ability is different. They just tend to be more creative naturally. They tend to be more divergent in their thinking naturally. Anybody can learn to be creative. So using personality in the workplace, like how do we apply it? How do we use personality assessments, something like the Big Five, and the assessments that measure it? How do we use it? Well, I think there's some opportunity here. First of all, personality assessments, measuring people's personality, can be great for, on an individual basis, enhancing your self-awareness. It's also really good, like I said, for measuring the types of people within a given group and letting them talk about their differences. Like say, hey, look, you're an introvert, I'm an extrovert. That explains this dynamic we've been seeing, and what do we do about that? So it can create it can surface some otherwise hard to see differences between people and give you something concrete to talk about in developing a better team dynamic. It's also really good for you to say, okay, who am I? What kind of person am I? What kind of environment suits me? Am I likely to more naturally thrive in or feel comfortable in? So if you're really extroverted and you're really, you're really outgoing, kind of high energy, maybe you do well in a place like Zappos with this really fun kind of wild culture. Or maybe you do well at a place like Hot Topic, whereas if you're really introverted, really withdrawn, that might be difficult for you. I mean, again, it's not that you couldn't do well there, it's just that may not be your first choice. Now, so personality can give you some really useful information. And by the way, you should know that it's not unusual for employers to give you personality assessments. Whether or not it's the Big Five, whether or not they're assessing you on the Big Five is one thing, but employers assess personality a lot. They don't always use the information very well, but they certainly use it, or they at least collect the information. It's important to be aware of some limitations with personality. First of all, I think there's often too much emphasis on personality, saying like, oh, it's just a personality conflict, or oh, they're like that because of their personality. Personality explains things. It doesn't explain everything. And like I said, it's not ability. So confusing personality with ability is a big misunderstanding, and it can lead people to really overlook people, saying, oh, well, you'll never be able to do that because your personality is this. That's the wrong kind of statement to make. Whether or not somebody can do something or learn to do it is really not related to their personality. But because people make these oversimplifications and overemphasize personality, that can create problems. So those are some limitations, I think. Also, to really interpret the results of a personality assessment thoroughly and to make to discuss implications and to apply that information, that's hard. It's hard work. It's tricky, and I don't really have the expertise to do it on any sort of large scale. You certainly don't, just by taking this class. So, if you're going to collect that information, there's going to be this kind of common sense, ideas are going to come to you like, oh, well, it seems like this and this because of this. I mean, but if you're not trained in this area, be aware that you do lack skill in terms of applying. And I would be cautious about overstepping your knowledge in that domain. And that's where I think some employers make a mistake. They measure this stuff, but they don't necessarily have the expertise to use the data that they collect. And so it either doesn't get used at all, or it gets used in a very unreliable way.